Welcome to our last part of the relationship series. Here we will talk about stages and phases and the outcome of basically interactions in relationships. So, what is important to pay attention to is that relationships are very much dynamic and they go through ups and downs that we call stages or phases. And the difference is really the stage is more a sequential compartmentalization of time where a relationship starts by two people introducing themselves to each other and kind of getting to know one another, and that's really the beginning phase, the stage. And I differentiate between stage and phase in terms of that sequential order, whereas phase is simply a duration of time of some events happening that are determined by multiple different factors. They don't necessarily have to fall into a series of sequences of phases. It could be just one phase. And it's a little bit different, and this is just a made up differentiation. It's not a universally understood concept or a discrepancy between phases and stages, but just for the matter of simplicity, it is good for our discussion at least and videos that I will produce to differentiate between what I mean as stage and phase. So a stage again is the duration where, for instance, the beginning stage of a relationship is where two people get to know each other, and that is particularly different in its dynamics as compared to, let's say, a further stage down the road, which would be post introduction. There is more of a dating phase, and then the stage after that would be more of a mating phase and kind of development of intimacy. And then another stage after that, which would be more like the, if you will, actual intimacy stage, where there's a lot of time spent on strengthening the bond between the members of the couple. And then after that, you have more of a honeymoon phase where everything is really rosy colored and beautiful and euphoric and happy. And then after that, there is the stage of more of a maintenance of the relationship, where also more due to the more perceived security, at least people are then willing to show their true self more than before, including their vulnerability. So in the previous stages, the very much beginning all the way to the honeymoon, people also are their true self, but it's skewed by a sense of positivity and really focusing more on the strengths and skills and benefits and positive attitudes that people have, the pleasant, more or less assets that they bring into the relationship. Whereas during the maintenance and the more longer stage of basically living life together for many years, and then literally going through many phases of ups and downs of experiencing life and growing together, there is more balanced approach toward that true self, where people are willing to actually share some vulnerability and some weaknesses and some deficits, and not necessarily skew toward only pleasant assets. And then the latest stages in life, at least the relationship, really relates to the kind of coming up to a point where one or two people, or both of them, may decide either intentionally to part ways and separate themselves from this coupledom, or by accident or by chance or by just kind of life changing event, due to either illness or death or unforeseen circumstances, such as, let's say, perhaps abduction or something like that, that one member would literally kind of cease to exist, at least within the relationship. And then again, whether it's by choice or not, the relationship would end, whether or not either of the parties are actually alive. But and in most cases, what we see is when both people really come into their old age after many years of living together, and they simply die, and then that is the end of the relationship. That can certainly happen much sooner, as you're very well aware of. People may enter into very short-term relationships and then again end it due to the differences and circumstances. So now what is important to pay attention here is that at each stage people fulfill different roles and they engage with each other differently. And what is very interesting really is that in the beginning of the relationship, they actually engage in more productive ways of communicating with one another than during the maintenance and kind of intimacy stage of the relationship. Again, as it's almost like a curve, if you think about it, where the longer the duration, the more willingness to risk and become more vulnerable. However, also the more, almost at times, kind of conflictual or dysfunctional the communication becomes. Whereas in the beginning, mostly the dating, mating phase of the relationship is actually characterized by quite productive methods of communication, even though, again, because it is skewed, the communication content may solely focus on the pleasant characteristics and benefits of the individuals. So let's delve into that a little bit in terms of what is the actual difference between productive and unproductive communication. When people are dating each other, they're getting to know each other, what happens is that they tend to naturally ask more questions, as they are literally extremely curious, as well as unfamiliar with their partner. So pay attention to this part, that they have no choice but to ask questions. And that is predetermined by their unfamiliarity and high level of curiosity. So those two elements are naturally there, which again naturally lead a person to ask questions because they want to know about their partner. So everything feels natural. Everything comes across as very much the necessity of the day, or of the type of relationship and communication that they're engaging in, which is quite different than what you see happening in the communication between two people further down the road in the later stages of their relationship, where many people who come in after, I would say, maybe 6 months or a couple of years of relationship, again depends when they found more of a secure bond with each other and how fast they progress through these stages. But somewhere between, I would say, 6 months to about 3 years of relationship, they may come into a counselor, a therapist, with certain complaints, and again it revolves around that lack of understanding and feeling heard and validated and valued in the relationship. And when you really pay attention, you observe their communication, what you notice is that they are literally talking at each other. They continually make assumptions, talk at each other. They're relentless in becoming an orator, and lack the skills of listening. They lack curiosity, and they lack what we call doubt in their assumptions. So more or less allowing some uncertainty in their presumptions and assumptions to help them with that process of becoming curious and really doing the right thing, which is asking questions. Instead, in the later stages of the relationship, they constantly, more or less, tell one another what needs to happen. They become patronizing, instructional, almost pedagogic, and dogmatic in their way of really, at times even aggressively raising their voice and yelling at each other, and showing very extreme and intense emotions that display frustration, anger, agitation, resentment, and literally just all those negative emotions that describe a sense of dissatisfaction, at times even a sense of perhaps betrayal or abandonment, or other types of very hurtful, painful experiences that they have in the relationship. So now, what do we do in the later stages if they come in and want to mend their relationship? We literally help them change their communication, again, from that monotonous talking at each other to what they used to do in the beginning of the relationship, which was characterized by asking questions, allowing curiosity to lead their way, keeping their assumptions at bay, and kind of double checking, using their own doubt, if you will, to guide them, teach them, to let them know that maybe they don't know the whole picture. So basically giving the benefit of the doubt to their partner and being willing to discover more about one another. Those are very important elements, giving the benefit of the doubt, kind of assuming more positive things, if you will, rather than negative things, not seeing the worst in the actions and the words of the partner. And again, the road to get to a conclusion and resolution based on this a more positive foundation and mindset would be through asking questions. Because what happens is, just like they did when they were dating, by asking questions, they create a positive, safe atmosphere, a more pleasant experience of communication. They show interest. They allow one another to almost kind of examine their own inner world and internal reactions, become more comfortable with their own uncertainties, anxieties, doubts, and feeling still supported and understood by their partners, and also feeling safe enough to actually make mistakes and be vulnerable. So all of those things naturally happen in the beginning of a relationship, during the dating phase, during the mating phase, but it's not happening by accident. Actually, there is a very proven methodology that leads to that type of a pleasant bonding experience, which is, as I mentioned earlier, by asking questions and active listening and reflective, empathic listening. That combination is something called dialogue, and specifically more of an effective dialogue, and maybe a dialogue of intimacy that has been referred to by many different names. And that is what we engage in when we help partners to kind of overcome those unpleasant experiences later on through their life. So this is kind of a summary of stages and what they go through and how things change. And certainly there's some other aspects of each stage, such as, during the mating and intimacy stage, there's most likely a lot of sexual, sensual experience and interaction and getting to know one another, and then later in life to perhaps even more of sharing in terms of philosophical and existential sharing, where all of those experiences together and the memories that the couple creates with each other around important, significant events in their lives, they culminate into a very pleasant bond and ultimately lead to that maintenance stage. And that's where they most likely feel secure enough to also have offspring. And that's that other characteristic of their growth in their coupledom, that they move beyond just two single people living together and being together and having a relationship together, because then they are creating a family. So their roles change from lovers, if you will, to and partners, to also mothers and fathers and parents, and role models for their offspring. And then you have to really pay attention to what are the important aspects and characteristics within that model in terms of that stage of the family experience beyond just the partner experience, because that certainly puts a little bit more burden and stress on the roles that they have in relationship to each other. Again, goes back to the other video we talked about, the limited resources that they have, and the skills and deficits they have to deal with those limited resources, given that they have kids now. And then even later on, when they have grandkids, that too changes their role and their responsibilities. And then at one point of time, they're going to go through what we call an empty nest syndrome, which is more or less kind of losing all of these intense daily interactions and connections for the sake of their children growing up, moving on, building their own families, and same thing with their grandchildren. And then coming all the way to the last more or less end of life stage, or at least end of relationship stage, where again, as we discussed, whether it is by choice or not, they lose a partner. Bottom line, that's the feeling of loss and perhaps failure, and that's also a stage that has its own characteristics, where people need to learn how to deal with that and how it affects them personally. The other aspect was phases. So phases is really kind of simple. As mentioned earlier, a phase is simply a unpredictable. It is an unpredictable event that happens to individuals, and they may go through that, and that is something that just affects them, maybe biologically or neurologically or psychologically or spiritually. And that is something that happens to everybody. It could happen because of a job loss, or maybe strife in relationships between, let's say, a parent and a child, and the partner of that parent may experience that separation differently. So it's a phase of perhaps stress, extra stress, that one partner goes through, one of the members of the partnership goes through, and the other partner basically is kind of observing or coexisting with it, but not experiencing it the same exact way. Like I mentioned, there are many examples. It could be illness, it could be career changes, it could be family relationship changes, it could be financial loss, it could be perhaps an accident that happens that affects a person for a short duration. So any of those phases that can, again, unpredictable, can happen to many of us, all of us, at different times. We have to just simply understand and have patience and tolerance, and also learn how to be there for our partner during these difficult phases that can happen during any of these stages of life. The functionality, happiness on the relationship also literally depends more or less on how a person observes and interprets the outcome of that relationship, and that's more of a subjective experience. To give an example, we have many people who, let's say, they call themselves quite successful and happy, but then when you look at their progression, the history of their life, they may have been through many relationships, many solid relationships, kind of formal relationships, where they have been married, divorced, they have had children back to back from these different marriages, more or less each one of them technically could be regarded as failures or failed relationships, but also at the same time they may have provided some lessons that ultimately work for this person currently, for in their current relationship, or even if they're not in a relationship. So and that is the other aspect, that again, to kind of summarize what happiness in a relationship means, literally depends on that type of a subjective summary, review, and conclusion that they make for themselves, having included these lessons that they have learned over time, meaning that some of the failed experiences in their lives may actually provide beneficial lessons that ultimately lead to their current happiness. So I hope you enjoyed these more long videos. Now in the future, what we will do is create more shorter videos with examples that delve into each aspects of these concepts that we brought up. But anytime you feel like you want to review those two, go back to them. These videos are available. Make sure you leave us some comments. We would be happy to create more videos for you as well. Thank you, and have a nice day.